The air in the back room of the gilded cage is thick with the stench of cheap whiskey, unwashed bodies, and despair. It's a smell Alara knows better than her own name. She is propped on a wooden crate, the splintered edges digging into her thighs through her thin chemise. A raw, profound ache radiates from the core of her, a brutal reminder of the ordeal that ended only 6 hours ago. In her arms, wrapped in a scrap of stained linen, is the source of that pain and the only clean thing in her world. A daughter, small and silent, her breath shallow in the suffocating heat. Maeve, the brothel's owner, stands before the gathered men, her voice a rasp of stale cigar smoke and false cheer. A fine piece of stock, gentlemen. Young, healthy, and proven fertile. What am I bid for her labor? Let's start the bidding at $10. A few cruel chuckles ripple through the room. They aren't bidding on labor. Everyone knows what they're bidding on. Alara focuses on the tiny face nestled in the crook of her arm, trying to block out the leering eyes and crass remarks. In the corner, a man named Silas Blackwood stands apart from the others, his face a mask of shadow beneath the brim of his worn hat. He watches, his jaw a hard line, his presence a pocket of stillness in the sordid room. He is a ghost at this vile feast, a widower whose own wife and child were taken by a fever less than a year ago, and the sound of a newborn's cry is a phantom limb he can still feel. A man with greasy hair and a silver tooth bids $5. Maeve's painted smile tightens. Silas doesn't move. Another man, a pig farmer known for his cruelty, raises it to $7. They are bartering for her flesh, for the use of her body while her own is still bleeding, for the right to discard the tiny, inconvenient bundle in her arms. When the bidding stalls at $9.50, a grimy hand reaching for his coin purse, Silas's voice cuts through the grime. $20. The room falls silent. All eyes turn to the quiet man in the corner. Maeve's eyes gleam with surprise and greed. The pig farmer sputters, then glares. Silas's gaze doesn't waver. It's fixed on the girl on the crate, on the fierce, desperate way she shields her child. The farmer, emboldened by drink, sneers. 21. Before Maeve can even acknowledge the bid, Silas speaks again, his voice low and final, carrying the weight of a tombstone. 50. The word hangs in the air, an impassable wall. It is more money than anyone in the room has seen in months. It is a rancher's seed money, a winter's worth of supplies. It is an act of madness. The farmer shrinks back, muttering. Maeve, recovering quickly, slams a bottle on a nearby table. Sold. To the grieving Mr. Blackwood, and with those words, his life, and hers, are irrevocably changed. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The transaction was swift and cold. Silas counted out the worn bills into Maeve's eager palm, his eyes never leaving her, ensuring she saw the disgust simmering beneath his stoic expression. He didn't speak a word to Alara. He simply nodded toward the door, a gesture that was less a command and more an opening. She gathered her baby closer, her muscles screaming in protest as she rose from the crate. She expected a rough hand on her arm, a shove toward the door. Instead, he waited, his patience a foreign and unsettling thing. The journey to his ranch was made in near total silence, broken only by the rhythmic clop of his horse's hooves and the soft, mewling sounds from the bundle in her arms. He had her ride the horse, its gait slow and steady, while he walked alongside, his hand resting lightly on the bridle. The sun was a brutal hammer in the sky, and the dust kicked up from the trail coated her skin, sticking to the sweat on her brow. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He was a big man, broad-shouldered from years of hard labor, his face weathered by sun and sorrow. He never looked at her directly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but she felt his awareness of her, of every wince of pain, of every time she shifted the baby to a more comfortable position. His ranch was nestled in a small, arid valley, miles from the sour humanity of the town. It was a stark place, a small, well-kept cabin and a sturdy barn stark against the vast, unforgiving landscape of rock and sagebrush. There was a loneliness to it that seeped into the bones, but it was a clean loneliness, a world away from the suffocating proximity of the gilded cage. He helped her down from the horse with a careful, impersonal touch, his hands strong but surprisingly gentle on her elbows. He led her inside the cabin. It was spare, consisting of a single main room with a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. Off to the side was a closed door. "That room is yours," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "There's water in the basin. I'll bring you some food." He turned and left before she could respond, not that she had any words. The room was not what she expected. It was clean, meticulously so. A simple bed with a patchwork quilt was against one wall. A small window, covered with a thin muslin curtain, looked out over the valley. On a small dresser sat a silver-backed brush and a porcelain doll with a cracked face, relics of a life that was no longer here. This was a woman's room, a wife's room. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. What kind of man brought a brothel girl into his dead wife's sanctuary? She laid her daughter, whom she had silently named Lily, on the quilt. The baby was so small, so fragile. Alara splashed cool water on her own face from the basin, the simple act of washing away the grime of the brothel feeling like a baptism. When Silas returned, he didn't enter the room. He knocked softly on the doorframe and set a tray on the floor just outside. It held a bowl of thin stew, a piece of hard bread, and a cup of milk. "Eat," he said, and walked away. The first few days passed in this strange, silent rhythm. He would leave food for her 3 times a day. He never tried the door, never lingered, never demanded anything. He rose before the sun and worked until long after it set, his movements economical and tireless. She watched him from the small window, a ghost in his house, as he mended fences, tended to his few cattle, and chopped wood with a relentless, punishing force that seemed aimed at something other than the logs. She spent her time tending to Lily, her body slowly, painfully healing. The quiet was a balm, but also a source of deep suspicion. No man was this decent without wanting something. The waiting was its own kind of torture. One afternoon, she saw him in the barn, working on a small wooden object. He was sanding it down, his large, calloused hands moving with an almost reverent care. It was a cradle, a beautifully made, simple pine cradle. He ran his hand over the smooth wood, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, the grief he carried was so palpable it seemed to suck the air from the valley. He had built it for his own child, she realized, the one he had lost. Later that evening, he left the cradle outside her door, alongside her tray. There was no note, no explanation, just the cradle. Hesitantly, she dragged it into the room and placed Lily inside. It fit her perfectly. As she rocked her daughter to sleep, the smooth, gentle motion was a comfort to them both. A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path through the dust on her cheek. It was the first time she had cried since Lily was born. Their fragile peace was tested when supplies ran low. The trip to town was unavoidable. Silas sat her and the baby in the wagon, his rifle resting in its scabbard beside him. The moment they rode onto the main street, the whispers started. Windows were stages for staring, scornful faces. Women pulled their children closer, as if Alara's presence were a disease. Men smirked and nudged each other, their eyes crawling over her with a familiar, proprietary insolence. At the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Henderson, served Silas with curt efficiency, but his eyes kept flicking to Alara, his lips curled in a permanent sneer. As they loaded their supplies, the pig farmer from the auction stumbled out of the saloon. His eyes lit up with malicious glee when he saw them. "Well, Blackwood," he slurred, swaggering closer. "Enjoying your $50 whore? Hope she's worth the price." Silas didn't rise to the bait. He continued tying down a sack of flour, his movements deliberate. Alara flinched, pulling Lily's blanket tighter around her. "She got a name," Silas said, his voice flat and cold as river stone. He didn't look up. The farmer laughed. "Oh, they all got names. Don't mean nothing. You get tired of her, you send her my way. I'll give you half what you paid." Silas stopped his work. He slowly straightened up, turning to face the man. He was several inches taller and a great deal broader, and all the quiet grief that usually hung about him had been replaced by something harder, something dangerous. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You'll stay away from my ranch," he said, "and you'll stay away from her. This is the only time I'll tell you." There was a finality in his tone that cut through the farmer's drunken haze. The man blanched, took a half step back, and then scurried away, muttering curses under his breath. Silas finished securing the flour sack, his jaw tight. He helped Alara back onto the wagon seat without a word. The ride home was as silent as the first one, but the silence had changed. It was no longer just empty space. It was a shield he had raised around her. That night, for the first time, she didn't bolt her door. The turning point came a month later, under a bruised purple sky threatening a storm. Lily grew listless, her skin hot to the touch. By nightfall, she was burning with fever, her small body trembling with weak, piteous cries that tore through Alara's heart. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried everything she could think of, cool cloths, rocking her, trying to get her to nurse, but nothing worked. The fever climbed. In desperation, she ran from her room, clutching the baby. Silas was at the table, cleaning his rifle by the light of a single lantern. He looked up, his face grim, as she burst into the room. "She's sick," Alara choked out, the words tangled with tears. "She's burning up. I don't know what to do." He was on his feet in an instant. He took one look at the baby, his expression hardening with a focused concern. "Feverfew," he said, more to himself than to her. "My wife, Mary, she used it for fevers." He guided Alara to a chair by the hearth and gently took Lily from her arms. For a moment, Alara's protective instincts flared, a wild urge to snatch her back, but the tenderness with which he held the child was disarming. He handled her with an expertise born of tragic experience. "There's a poultice," he explained, his voice low and steady, a calming anchor in her storm of fear. "And a tea. Keep her warm, but not too warm." For the next several hours, they worked together, a silent, desperate team. He ground herbs with a stone pestle, his movements sure and practiced. She held cool, damp cloths to Lily's forehead. He brewed a bitter-smelling tea, and together they managed to get a few precious drops past the baby's lips. The storm broke outside, rain lashing against the cabin, but inside, the only storm that mattered was the one raging inside Lily's tiny body. Sometime near dawn, as the rain softened to a drizzle, the fever broke. Lily's breathing deepened, her skin cooled, and she finally fell into a true, healing sleep in the cradle Silas had pulled close to the fire. Alara slumped in her chair, drained of all strength. Silas sat across from her, his face etched with exhaustion, his shoulders bowed. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet room. He just nodded, his eyes on the sleeping child. "Mary, our son was born with a weakness in his lungs. He only lasted 2 days." The confession was stark, dropped into the stillness like a stone into a deep well. "The cradle? I finished it the day he died." Alara finally understood. The grief, the solitude, the quiet protection. It wasn't about ownership or desire. It was about ghosts. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling pitifully small. He looked at her then, his gaze direct for the first time. It held no pity, only a shared, profound understanding of loss. "I saw Maeve ready to sell you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I saw that baby in your arms. I couldn't let that happen. No child should start its life on a block, and no mother should have to watch." The truth of it settled over her, simple and devastating and kind. He hadn't bought a whore. He had saved a mother and her child. In the dim, pre-dawn light, surrounded by the ghosts of the family he had lost, Silas Blackwood had given her and Lily a sanctuary. The newfound peace on the ranch was a fragile, tender thing, easily broken. And it was Maeve who came to break it. She arrived one bright, cloudless afternoon in a hired buggy, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Alara recognized from the brothel. They pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Maeve stepped down, her face a thunderous mask of false pleasantry and greed. Silas was splitting wood near the barn. He saw them coming and slowly, deliberately, set his axe down, wiping his hands on his trousers as he walked to meet them at the edge of the yard. Alara watched from the cabin window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Lily was asleep in the cradle behind her. "Blackwood," Maeve called out, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "A social call. I was just passing by and thought I'd check on my investment." "She's not your investment," Silas said, his voice level. He stood between them and the cabin, a human wall. "Oh, but she is," Maeve purred, stepping closer. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about our little transaction. A girl like that, she has debts." property of the house. Your $50 was merely a down payment on her contract. It was a lie, a fabrication spun from greed, and they all knew it. One of her men took a step forward, his hand resting on the butt of a pistol tucked into his belt. The lady wants the girl back. Rancher. Silas didn't even glance at the man. His eyes were locked on Maeve. You got your money. The deal is done. You're not welcome here. Leave. I don't think so. Maeve sneered, her facade cracking. She belongs to me until I say otherwise. I'll have her back, and the brat, too. A baby can fetch a pretty penny in the right circles. The casual cruelty of her words, the threat against Lily, was a spark to dry tinder. Alara felt a surge of cold fury that burned away the last vestiges of her fear. She was no longer the broken creature on the auction block. She was a mother. She walked to the cabin door and opened it, stepping out into the sunlight. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. She only had a conviction that was as solid as the mountain behind the ranch. She came to stand beside Silas, her shoulder just inches from his. She didn't look at him, but she felt his surprise, and then a quiet, fierce pride. Her eyes met Maeve's. I am not your property, Alara said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard with the clarity of a bell. I am not an investment, and you will not touch my daughter. Maeve stared, momentarily stunned by the defiance from the girl she had considered little more than cattle. She saw Alara, clean and healthy, standing not behind the rancher, but beside him. She saw the set of Silas's jaw, the protective solidarity in their stance. She saw two people bound not by a contract or a purchase, but by a shared will. They were not a man and his chattel. They were a family. Her sneer faltered. She could push, she could order her men forward, but she saw in Silas's eyes that blood would be shed, and it would likely be hers. The fight would be more trouble than it was worth. Her power had always been in making people feel worthless and alone. Here, these two were neither. With a final, venomous glare, Maeve turned on her heel. You'll regret this, Blackwood, she spat, climbing back into her buggy. Her men followed, looking almost relieved. They kicked up a storm of dust as they fled, leaving behind a profound and ringing silence. Silas and Alara stood together in the quiet aftermath, not moving, until the dust settled back onto the hard-packed earth. The threat was gone. The valley seemed to breathe a sigh of relief with them. He finally turned his head to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw not the shadow of his grief, but the dawn of a future he had never expected. He had bought her to save her from the world, but standing there, shoulder to shoulder, they had saved each other. He gave a slow nod, a gesture that spoke volumes of respect and gratitude. She offered him a small, true smile in return, the first she had given since arriving. He turned and walked back toward the woodpile, picking up his axe. He wasn't running from his sorrow anymore. He was building a home. Alara went back inside the cabin, the sun warm on her back, and gently rocked the cradle where her daughter slept, safe and sound. The quiet rhythm of the axe splitting wood outside was no longer a sound of lonely labor, but the steady heartbeat of their new life. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more.